The more I thought about it, the madder I got. But that wasn't what I intended to discuss with Cynthia. The appointment was on Friday afternoon. I started to lose my nerve again when I saw her in her office, her eyes made up with pale green shadows and her hair pulled back in a gold beret. I don't believe Cynthia was much older than I was, but you put somebody in high-heeled pumps and sit her behind a big desk and age is no longer an issue. She is more important to you than you are, period. Proof of abandonment is very, very difficult, she was explaining to me. In this case, probably impossible, but you're right. There are legal alternatives. The cornerstone of an adoption of this type would have to be written consent of the child's natural parents, and you need to be named in the documents. But if there are no natural parents, if they're dead, for instance, they would have to come from the nearest living relative. The person who would normally have custody and a death certificate would have to be present as well. But the most important thing, as I said, is that the document would name you, specifically, as the new guardian. What kind of document exactly? The law varies. In some states, the mother would have to acknowledge her consent before a judge or representative of the Department of Economic Security. In others, a simple written statement, notarized and signed before witnesses, is sufficient. What about on an Indian reservation? Do they know that sometimes in an Indian reservation they don't give birth or death certificates? Cynthia wasn't the type that liked to be told anything. I'm aware of that, she said. In certain cases, exceptions are made. Cynthia's office was tiny, really, and her desk wasn't actually all that big. She didn't even have a window in there. Don't you miss knowing what the weather's like? I asked her. I beg your pardon? You don't have a window. I just wondered if you ever kind of lost touch with what was going outside, being cooped up in here all day with the air conditioning and the fluorescent lighting. It was the first time in my life I ever said anything like fluorescent lighting out loud. As you recall, I came to your house on the evening that April was assaulted. Cynthia always called Turtle by her more conventional name. I do my share of field work, she said. Of course. Have I answered your question, Taylor? Mostly, not completely. I'd like to know how a person would go about finding the information you mentioned, about the laws in different states, like Oklahoma, for instance. I can look that up for you and get back to you. If you like, I can get you the name of someone in Oklahoma City who could help you formalize the papers. This took me by surprise. You'd be willing to help me out? Surely, I'm on your side here, Taylor. She leaned forward and folded her hands on her desk blotter, and I noticed her fingernails were in a bad shape. It's possible that Cynthia was a nail biter. Are you saying that you'd rather see Turtle stay with me than go into a state home? There has never been any doubt in my mind about that. I stood up, walked around the chair, and sat down again. Excuse my French, but why in the heck didn't you say so before now? She blinked her gold coin eyes. I thought that ought to be brought to your decision. At the end of my hour, I was halfway out the door. But then stopped and came back, closing the door behind me. Thank you, I said. You're welcome. Can I ask you a kind of personal question? It's about the cameo brooch. She looked amused. You can ask, she said. Do you have to shop at Salvation Army? I mean, is it because you pay, or do you just like rummaging through other people's family heirlooms? I'm a trained therapist, Cynthia said, smiling. I don't answer questions like that. Out in the lobby, I stopped to chat with one of the secretaries, who asked where my little girl was today. The secretary's name was Jewel. I often spoke with her several times before. She had a somewhat dyslexia, which she explained was a disease that caused people to see things backwards. Like the American flag, for instance, she said. The way he would see it, it would be that the stars are up in the right-hand corner instead of the left. But then there's the other thing, where it doesn't matter. Like you take the word wow, for instance. That's his favorite word. He writes it all over. And the word mom, too. Before I had gotten around to leaving the building, another secretary came hustling over and handed me a note, which he said was from Cynthia. He said, "I appreciate your sensitivity and not wishing to discuss April's custody in her presence. I'm sorry if I had been careless. There is also a name, Mr. Jonas Wilford Armistead, along with an Oklahoma City address, and beneath the words, good luck." All evening, after I fed the kids and put them to bed, I paced the house. I couldn't wait for Luann to get home. But then, when she said I wasn't sure, I wanted to help tell her anything yet. I hadn't completely made up my mind. "For heaven's sake," Luann said, "you're making me nervous. Either sit down or wash the dishes." I washed the dishes. "Whatever's on your mind, I hope you get it settled," she said, and went to the living room to read. She had been reading a novel called Daughter of the Cheyenne Winds, which she claimed she had found in her locker at Red Hot Mama's, and had nothing whatever to do with Aunt Hell being on the Montana-Colorado circuit. I followed her into the living room. "You're not mad, are you? Because I don't want to talk about it." "Nope. I'll tell you tomorrow. I just I have to think some more." She didn't look up. "Go think," she said. "Think and wash the dishes." I didn't sleep all that night. I was getting used to getting used to it. I watched Turtle roll from her side to her stomach and back again. Her eyes rolled back and forth under her eyelids, and sometimes her mouth worked too. Whoever she was talking to in her dream, she told him a whole lot more than she ever told me. I'd have to pay good money to be in her dream. In the morning, I left her asleep and went to Maddie's to finish an alignment and front and rear rotation I had left undone the previous afternoon. The guy was coming in sometime that day to pick it up. I didn't look at the clock, but it must have been nearly early when I went in because I was already finished and ready to go home before Maddie came downstairs. I hung around a while longer, making coffee and dusting the shelves and changing the calendar. It was still on May and this is August. I stared for a long time at the picture of the Aztec man carrying the passed out woman, thinking about whatever Latin America tragedy it stood for. Thinking naturally of Esperanza and Estevan. Though I knew that more often than not it was the other way around. The woman carried the man through the tragedy. The man and the grandma and all the kids. Finally, Maddie came down. We had a cup of coffee and we talked. Afterward, I found Luann and the kids in the park. Turtle was amusing herself by sweeping a patch of dirt with an old hairbrush, presumably Edna's since it was red. And Luann had momentarily put aside Daughter of the Cheyenne Winds to engage in a contest of will with Dwayne Ray. Luann was bound to win the course. I said, "No, give it to me right now." "Where'd you get that from?" She grabbed his fist, which was headed on an automatic pilot course for his mouth, and extracted a dirt-covered purple jelly bean. "Where in the heck do you think he got that? My God, Taylor, just imagine if he'd eaten it." Dwayne Ray's mouth remained in the shape of O for several seconds, still expecting the intercepted jelly bean. Then he started to scream. "I used to know this old farm woman that said you got to eat a peck of dirt before you die," I said. Luann picked up Dwayne Ray and bounced him. "Well, maybe if you don't eat a peck of dirt before your first birthday, then you won't die so quick," is what I say. I sat down on the bench. "Listen, I made up my mind about it something. I'm going to drive Esperanza and Estevan to a safe house in Oklahoma. And while I'm there, I'm going to see if I can find any of Turtle's relatives." She stared at me. Dwayne Ray came down on her knee with the bump and was stunned into being quiet. "What for?" "So they can sign her over to me." "Well, what if they won't? What if they see how good she's turning out and decide they want her back?" "I don't think they will." "But what do they do?" "Darn it, Luann, you've been telling me till you were blue in the face to do something, take action, think positive, blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to think positive here." "Sorry." What other choice have I got than to go? If I just sit here on my hands, then they take her. I know you're right. If her relatives want her back, then I'll think of something. We'll cut that fence when we come to it. What if you can't find them? Sorry. I'll find them. Luann uncharacteristically had overlooked the number one thing I ought to be worried about. Over the next few days, Maddie asked me about 50 times if I was sure I knew what I was doing. She told me that if I got caught, I could get 5 years in prison and a $2,000 fine for each illegal person I was assisting, which in this case would be $4,000. To tell the truth, I couldn't even let these things into my head. But Maddie persisted. This isn't just hypothetical. It actually happened before that people got caught. I don't know why you're worried about. I told her Esperanza and Estevan would get a whole lot worse than prison and a fine. I don't know why you're worried about me, I told her. Esperanza and Estevan would get a whole lot worse than prison and a fine. I did suggest to Maddie, though, that it might be a good idea to fix the ignition on Tutu, my VW, now that we are setting out across the country again. She looked at me as though I had suggested shooting an elected official. You're not taking that old thing, she said. You'll take the Lincoln. It's got a lot of room. It's reliable. I was offended. What's wrong with my car? I want to know. What's wrong with the child? I could just stand here telling you till the sun went down. And just about any one of those things could get you pulled over by a cop. You think you care so much about Esperanza and Esteban? You better start using your head of yours for something better besides thinking up smart remarks. Maddie walked off. I seen her boarding on Mad before, but never me. Clear, she did not want me to go. The night before I was to leave, Virgie May and Parsons came knocking on the door. It was late, but Luann and I were still up, going round and round about what I ought to pack. She thought I should take my very best clothes in case I might have to impress someone with my financial security. She was sure that at the very least I ought to take a pair of stockings, which I would have to borrow from Luann, not being in the habit of owning such things myself. I pointed out to her that it was the middle of summer, and I didn't think I need to impress anyone that much. We didn't notice a timid little peck at the door until it grew considerably louder. Then Luann was afraid to answer. I looked at the window. It's Virgie May, for heaven's sake, I said, and let her in. She stood looking befuddled for a second or two, and then pulled herself together and said, Edna said I ought to come over and get you. We have something the children might like to see, if you don't think it would do too much harm to wake them. What a surprise! What a surprise, Luann asked. She was back in less than a minute with Dwayne Ray in one arm and Turtle by the other hand. Turtle trailed grumpily behind, whereas Dwayne Ray chose to remain asleep, his bobbing head like an old stuffed animal's. In the intervening minute, I had not extracted any further information from Virgie. We followed her out of our front door and up the walk to their porch. I could make out Edna sitting in the glider in the corner of the porch. We saw what looked like a bouquet of silvery white balloons hang in the air. Flowers. A night-blooming cerise, Virgie may explain. The flowers open only one night of the year, and then they're gone. It was a huge sprawling plant with branches that flopped over the porch railing and others that reached nearly as high as the eaves. I had certainly noticed it before, standing in the corner in the crumbling pot, flattened and spiny and frankly extremely homely. And it had crossed my mind to wonder why Virgie May didn't throw the thing out. I had never seen anything so heavenly, Luann said.